Have you ever imagined traveling and discovering that one of your favorite foods is banned in that country? Well, the world is full of surprises. And when it comes to food, some dietary restrictions can be quite shocking. In certain places, what we consider normal can be seen as unclean, dangerous, or even illegal. This is the reality in countries where culture, religion, or health laws shape what can or cannot go on your plate. In this video, we'll explore these country curiosities together, revealing the foods you can never eat in certain regions. Get ready for a gastronomic journey full of unusual prohibitions that will leave you with your mouth open. When it comes to food, what is trivial in one place may be absolutely unthinkable in another. Think for a moment. Something as simple as what you put on your plate can reveal a lot about a country's culture, beliefs, and history. Curiosity about countries goes far beyond landscapes and monuments. It extends to the details that are on the table. Behind each meal, there are traditions that have taken root over time, reinforcing identities and even divisions. Eating is an essential act, but the rules that govern what we can and cannot eat are much deeper than we imagine. In many parts of the world, food is controlled by forces that go beyond taste. There is a mosaic of rules and prohibitions that touch on religious, cultural, and, in some cases, even government policies. Have you ever wondered why certain meats are banned in some places? Or why are some drinks that are so common in one country completely banned in another? The answer, interestingly, is not always related to taste or health, but rather to ancient traditions that shape society. The country's curiosity in this case is a key to understanding its prohibitions. These prohibitions, some of which may sound incomprehensible, are woven into the identity of each nation. In places like Saudi Arabia or India, dietary restrictions are intrinsically linked to faith, respect for animals, or social rules. What is common in one country can be seen with amazement in another. Each country, each culture, carries with it a food code that seems at first glance arbitrary, but which, in fact, is the reflection of a rich and diverse history. And how do these stories shape what you can and can't eat around the world? Curiosity about countries reveals fascinating details as we delve into each of these food traditions. Get ready, because from here on, we'll explore these curiosities and discover how food can be the mirror of a nation's soul. So, we move on towards Saudi Arabia, where pork and alcohol are more than just restrictions. In Saudi Arabia, dietary rules are guided by religious precepts that determine what can and cannot be consumed. Pork, for example, is strictly prohibited, not just as a dietary choice, but as a deeply ingrained social norm. This veto directly connects with the teachings of Islam, which guide the daily lives of Saudis. This prohibition is not only seen as a restriction, but as a practice that reinforces purity and obedience to the principles of faith. To a foreigner, it may seem like a simple habit, but to Saudis, it is a matter of identity and tradition. In addition to pork, alcoholic beverages also occupy a prominent place in the country's food prohibitions. Alcohol, whether at parties or social events, is completely unacceptable. In fact, the introduction of alcohol into the country is considered illegal, with severe consequences for anyone who tries to break this rule. The impact of Islam on these norms is so profound that even the manufacture and transportation of alcohol are seen as great offenses. Thus, what is a common drink elsewhere is here a symbol of disrespect for local norms. However, more than prohibiting, these rules shape a society based on respect for what is sacred. The local culture does not see restrictions as limitations, but as a way to protect what is valuable to them. This brings up an interesting country curiosity: how these food prohibitions can unite a community around a common goal, reinforcing values and beliefs at each meal. It is as if each food choice is a constant reminder of devotion to faith and the preservation of customs. As we move forward, this curiosity about countries leads us to think, if Saudi Arabia has such strict rules, what about places like India, where beef is sacred and vegetarianism is almost a philosophy of life? Let's delve into this peculiar world and understand how food traditions also shape Indian life. In India, the relationship with food goes far beyond nutrition. It is, in fact, a question of spirituality. Vegetarianism, widely practiced, is driven not only by a dietary preference, but by a philosophy of life that values the sacredness of animal life. The cow, in particular, occupies a central place in this belief system, being considered sacred and untouchable. This means that beef consumption is not only discouraged, but is illegal in many states. Respect for the cow is so deep that even the mere thought of killing it is seen as an affront to the country's spiritual balance. This country's curiosity leads us to understand that vegetarianism in India is directly linked to the religious traditions of Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, which see the act of not consuming meat as a way of purifying the body and soul. But make no mistake, it's not just a question of religion. It is a cultural practice that crosses generations. During important festivals like Diwali, people not only avoid meat, but adopt a strictly vegetarian diet as a gesture of respect for life and divinity. Food becomes an extension of devotion. This way of life is so profound that even food prepared in shared kitchens can be a point of contention. Many strict vegetarians do not eat in places where meat is cooked, for fear of contamination. It's interesting to think about how this attention to dietary details shapes culture and social interactions. What in other countries would be seen as a simple food choice in India is a fundamental part of identity. This curiosity about countries like India shows us that food is not just a necessity, but a mirror of a nation's deepest beliefs. And if India embraces vegetarianism so passionately, Japan takes a completely different path. Get ready to discover how whale meat, which many would find unacceptable, is a culturally valued delicacy in Japanese lands. In Japan, the consumption of whale meat is more than a mere culinary preference. It carries with it a strong cultural symbol. For many Japanese, this food is part of a heritage passed down through generations, associated with historical moments and the country's own survival in times of scarcity. However, this tradition clashed with international pressure and the global whale conservation movement, which generated intense debate about the ethics behind this practice. Whale meat, for the Japanese, is not just a delicacy, but a reflection of their cultural resilience. The curious thing is that, while many nations see whaling as a cruel act, in Japan, this practice is defended as a way of preserving national culture. They claim that whales have always been part of their diet, and that, in difficult times, this natural resource has helped sustain entire populations. But with globalization and growing environmental activism, the pressure to abandon this practice has intensified. Today, Japan maintains its stance, albeit on a smaller scale, generating a constant tension between the desire to preserve its traditions and the need to align with international values. This country's curiosity reveals an interesting dilemma. To what extent should a country maintain its traditions when they conflict with the rest of the world? For the Japanese, the answer lies in the balance between continuing to hunt in a controlled manner and trying to minimize the environmental impact. And so, while many vehemently oppose the consumption of whale meat, in Japan, this food is still seen as a cultural gem that cannot be forgotten. Now that we've delved into Japanese traditions, let's cross into even tighter territory. North Korea, where dietary rules are dictated not just by culture, but by strict government control. What do you eat there? Not much, as we will see below. In North Korea, food issues go far beyond cultural or religious preferences. It is deeply marked by scarcity and state control. The government strictly controls what can be consumed, and this means that the population is often limited to a subsistence diet based on rice, corn, and occasionally animal products. For most, meat and foods considered luxurious are rarely affordable. It is a scenario where food choices are not made for pleasure, but for the simple need for survival. This strict control reflects the regime's policy, which seeks to keep the population in a constant state of dependence. In government-controlled markets, the variety of food is minimal and the quality leaves much to be desired. The curious thing about this country is that even products that we consider basic, such as coffee or chocolate, are practically non-existent for a large part of the population. To the outside world, it is difficult to imagine living in a place where even the freedom to choose what to eat is controlled by political forces. The contrast with other countries is stark. In North Korea, the simple act of eating is fraught with limitations. Foods that are common in the West, such as pork or tropical fruits, are a real luxury for the North Korean population. This country's curiosity makes us reflect on how deprivation affects not only physical health, but also the mentality of a nation. Here, food is not just a matter of sustenance, but a symbol of the restrictions that permeate all spheres of life. From a controlled and oppressive regime, we move on to France, where food prohibitions seem less severe, but still cause controversy. Let's find out what makes French cheeses prohibited in several nations, and why gastronomy can also be the target of sanctions. France is known worldwide for its gastronomy, and raw milk cheeses are considered true cultural jewels. However, what is seen as a national delicacy on French territory is, paradoxically, prohibited in several other countries. These cheeses, produced from unpasteurized milk, carry on a tradition that goes back centuries, being an intrinsic part of French heritage. However, strict health regulations in some countries, such as the United States, consider these cheeses risky to health due to the potential for bacterial contamination. Thus, a piece of French cheese can become, in certain places, a symbol of controversy and restriction. The curious thing is that in France, this issue goes beyond food security, is seen as an attack on culture. For the French, banning their raw milk cheeses is almost an affront to their way of life. They argue that these cheeses are more than just foods. They are the expression of an art that has been perfected over generations. Every bite of a Roquefort or Brie is a direct connection to the history and land that produced them. However, outside of Europe, pasteurization has become the standard for ensuring food safety, creating a barrier for these French delicacies to cross borders. This country's curiosity makes us reflect on how something so appreciated by one nation can be viewed with suspicion by another. The cultural clash here is evident. While France praises its cheeses as symbols of quality and tradition, other nations prioritize public health and impose barriers. It's a silent battle between tradition and modernity, where food represents more than just nutrition. Now that we've explored the French cheese controversy, let's cross the borders to Italy, where the battle for authenticity is not just fought on the plates, but also in the bottles. Get ready to find out what's at stake in the fight for real olive oil. In Italy, olive oil is much more than a simple culinary ingredient. It is a true cultural heritage. Produced in the sun-drenched hills of Tuscany and beyond, Italian olive oil is prized for its purity and unmistakable flavor. However, this symbol of authenticity has been under threat for years due to fraud and adulteration in the international market. Many olive oils sold as Italian are actually blends of lower quality oils, which has led the Italian government to take strict measures to protect what is considered Italy's true liquid gold. The country's curiosity here lies in the fact that Italian legislation seeks to preserve the identity of this food, which has been part of the Mediterranean diet for centuries. The government has introduced controlled origin certifications such as DOP protected designation of origin, to ensure that consumers know exactly where the olive oil they are purchasing comes from. However, despite efforts, fraud is still frequent, and the fight for authentic olive oil continues, both in Italy and on global markets. The global impact of these counterfeits is significant, not only for the Italian economy, but also for consumer confidence. Olive oil, often considered a healthy and noble food, is at risk of losing its reputation due to adulteration. But for Italians, this battle is not just economic. It is a fight to preserve a way of life that values quality and tradition in every drop of olive oil. And so, after exploring Italy and its liquid gold, we head to Israel, where dietary rules are more than just cultural. They are dictated by strict religious laws. Let's understand what it really means to eat kosher and how it affects everyday life. In Israel, food is governed by a set of ancient laws known as kashrut, which dictate what is considered kosher, that is, suitable for consumption. These rules are more than simple dietary guidelines. They are a profound reflection of the Jewish faith. Eating kosher means following a path of spiritual purity that involves not only the choice of food, but also the way it is prepared and consumed. For example, meat and dairy cannot be mixed, and meat must be slaughtered according to specific methods that guarantee respect for the animal. This set of practices makes eating in Israel an experience that goes beyond taste, reflecting a devotion to religious commandments. The curious thing about the kosher system is that it is not limited to Israel. Jews around the world follow these practices, which has created a global market for kosher products. However, in Israel, this issue is even more intense, as most establishments respect kashrut laws, making compliance with these rules almost automatic in everyday life. Even at social events, kosher rules are taken seriously, and meals are often carefully planned to meet these requirements. This country's curiosity reveals how food can be a living manifestation of faith and identity. For anyone visiting Israel, understanding kosher laws is essential to immerse yourself in the local culture. It's not just about following rules, but about participating in a tradition that connects the present to the past in an intimate and spiritual way. Each kosher meal serves as a reminder of the importance of following the sacred precepts that shape Jewish life. From Israel, we head to China, where the relationship with food also carries traditions and controversies. One of the most debated and divisive foods is dog meat, a symbol of a tradition that is constantly changing in the country. In China, eating dog meat is a tradition that dates back centuries but is now shrouded in controversy. Although it is still allowed in some regions, the country is experiencing a change in values, especially in large cities, where the dog has gone from food to domestic companion. The Yulin Festival, where dog meat is widely consumed, has become a focus of global debate, drawing criticism from animal rights activists and dividing the Chinese population itself. What was once seen as part of the culture has now become a controversial and even taboo topic in many circles. Interestingly, although the practice still exists, the Chinese government is slowly taking steps to discourage the consumption of dog meat. In some provinces, meat has already been removed from menus, and there is a growing awareness of animal rights, something that was practically non-existent a few decades ago. The country's curiosity here is how China is balancing tradition with modernity, adapting to global values without losing sight of its cultural roots. This change in perspective did not happen overnight. In the past, dog meat was consumed mainly for its supposed medicinal and energetic properties. Today, international pressure and the growing urban middle class, which treats dogs as members of the family, have made this practice increasingly rare. However, in rural areas, consumption is still relatively common, creating a contrast between the countryside and large cities that reflects the country's rapid social and economic changes. From a changing China, we move on to the United States, where the list of prohibited foods may surprise many, showing that even the most modern nations have their culinary controversies. Let's explore American food bans you'd never imagine. In the United States, land of vast freedoms, it can be surprising to discover that certain foods are banned or heavily regulated. One of the most controversial examples is foie gras, a traditional French dish made from fattened duck or goose liver. In some states, such as California, the sale and production of foie gras has been banned due to concerns about the animal cruelty involved in its production. For many Americans, the idea of consuming such a controversial food source is unacceptable, which has sparked legal battles and heated arguments between animal rights advocates and food lovers. In addition to foie gras, another food that many would be surprised to learn is banned in some parts of the United States is haggis, a traditional Scottish delicacy made from sheep's innards. The ban comes from regulations on the consumption of animal lungs, which are seen as a public health risk. The country's curiosity here is how a dish so loved in another nation can be considered dangerous and therefore banned on American soil. Food legislation in the United States, contrary to what many people imagine, is quite strict in relation to exotic foods. The situation becomes even more interesting when we look at the drinks. In some states, the sale of energy drinks high in caffeine or taurine is restricted. Supporters of these laws claim that these products pose a health risk, especially for teenagers who consume these drinks in excess. This sparks a debate about how far the government should interfere in personal food choices, something that, for many Americans, seems to contradict the spirit of freedom for which the country is known. And if in the United States prohibitions are linked to health and well-being, in Australia we find a curious and almost unexpected prohibition: haggis, which on Australian soil faces unique challenges. Let's find out why this delicacy is so frowned upon there. In Australia, haggis, a traditional Scottish delicacy, faces an almost unusual barrier: the ban on its import. This dish, made from sheep's innards, such as heart, liver, and lungs, is considered delicious in Scotland. But in Australia, it cannot be sold due to strict regulations on the consumption of animal lungs. For many Scots living in Australia, this means they are deprived of a food that directly connects to their culture and heritage. This cultural clash between the acceptance of a traditional dish and food safety standards is an example of how globalization still encounters barriers. The country's curiosity here lies in the fact that the ban on haggis in Australian lands is not based on cultural rejection, but on health concerns. The Australian government, following a strict line of control over imported food, considers sheep lungs potentially dangerous for human consumption. It's a very pragmatic approach which aims to protect public health, but at the same time deprives lovers of Scottish cuisine of a dish that represents much more than simple nutrition. Furthermore, the haggis ban highlights a tension between the desire to preserve culinary traditions and the need to follow modern health regulations. In Australia, the cuisine is rich and varied, but always under the supervision of health authorities, who prioritize food safety above all else. This creates an environment where the preservation of traditions faces constant challenges, and where the search for the authentic comes up against legal barriers. From haggis in Australia, we now travel to Norway, where even a popular drink could be banned. Let's understand what makes Red Bull so controversial there. In Norway, one of the most popular energy drinks in the world, Red Bull, underwent a ban that left many curious. For years, the country prevented the drink from being sold, citing concerns about the effects of caffeine and taurine, two of Red Bull's main ingredients. The Norwegian government believed that excessive consumption of these substances could lead to health problems, especially among young people, who are the target audience for these drinks. Although this ban has been partially relaxed in recent years, the drink is still sold with heavy restrictions. making Norway one of the few countries where Red Bull is not widely available. The country's curiosity here arises when we realize that while many see Red Bull as a common drink, in places like Norway, it is treated with extreme caution. Norwegians are known for their concern for public health, and this strict attitude towards energy drinks reflects this care. In a country where quality of life and longevity are highly valued, it is natural for the government to impose limits on what it considers an unnecessary risk to the health of its population. However, this ban has brought to light a larger debate. To what extent should a government interfere in its citizens' food choices? For many, Red Bull is just another option among several drinks on the market, and it is up to the consumer to decide what is best for them. However, in Norway, this choice is moderated by the state, which generates discussions about personal freedom versus public health protection. From a cautious Norway, we now head to Germany, where the concerns are not about drinks, but about genetically modified foods, in a battle that involves technology, health, and food traditions. Let's explore this curious prohibition and what it reveals about Germans' relationship with their food. In Germany, the relationship with food is deeply influenced by a deep-rooted distrust of genetically modified foods, GMOs. Although in many countries GMOs are widely consumed and even encouraged, in Germany the situation is quite different. Restrictions against these products are strict, and the general population tends to view them with great skepticism. This resistance is not only a matter of health, but also of preserving agricultural traditions. Germans value the purity of their food and prefer cultivation methods that respect the environment and biodiversity, rejecting the use of genetically altered seeds. The curious thing about the German case is that it reflects a growing concern across Europe, where the European Union imposes strong regulations on GMOs, allowing each country to decide for itself about the cultivation and import of these foods. In Germany, this decision was clear: to preserve what they consider natural foods and free from technological interventions. This is a point of pride for the country, where sustainability and environmental protection are fundamental values. This country curiosity shows us how food, far from being just a matter of nutrition, is deeply intertwined with cultural identity. For Germans, avoiding genetically modified foods is a way of ensuring that their agricultural traditions continue to live on, and that the quality of their products is maintained. They believe that what they put on their plate should reflect respect for nature and human health. Now that we know the dietary restrictions in Germany, let's venture to Thailand, where crocodile meat, although exotic to many, is part of an ever-evolving tradition. What makes this food so intriguing in Thailand? Let's find out. In Thailand, crocodile meat is part of an exotic tradition that challenges our conventional idea of food. To many Westerners, this food may seem bizarre, but in Thailand, crocodile meat is consumed both for its supposed medicinal properties and for its peculiar flavor. However, with the growth of tourism and the modernization of the country, the relationship with this food is changing. Increased awareness about species preservation and new consumption patterns are slowly pushing crocodile meat off menus, at least in large urban centers. The interesting thing here is how tourism affects food legislation. In tourist areas, restaurants that serve crocodile meat to curious visitors find themselves up against new environmental laws and regulations that protect local wildlife. This creates a tension between maintaining a culinary tradition and adhering to new conservation standards. Thailand, known for its respect for nature, strives to balance these two forces without giving up its history, but recognizing the importance of preserving the environment. This country's curiosity reveals how much modernity and tradition can collide when it comes to food. What was once widely accepted is beginning to be questioned by younger generations who are looking for more sustainable and ethical alternatives. Thus, crocodile meat, which was once common, is starting to be seen in a different light, especially as the country tries to align itself with global environmental conservation standards. And now, leaving Thailand, we head to Egypt, where an ingredient common to many is considered unclean in certain religious circles. Let's explore the impact of garlic on the lives of some Egyptian communities and what it symbolizes culturally. In Egypt, an ingredient as simple as garlic can take on a controversial role in some communities. Although widely used in Egyptian cuisine, in certain religious and spiritual groups, garlic is seen as unclean. These beliefs date back to ancient teachings that state that garlic can interfere with spiritual and mental clarity, especially during religious practices or meditations. On religious festivals or purification days, the consumption of garlic is avoided, and even its smell is considered an obstacle to the purity of mind and body. This country's curiosity leads us to reflect on how such a common food can carry such great symbolic weight. For these communities, the prohibition of garlic is not just a matter of taste or preference, but an act of devotion and respect for spiritual traditions. It is interesting to see how food prohibitions can transcend the field of nutrition and invade the domain of the sacred, shaping behaviors that seem strange to outsiders, but that make perfect sense within a cultural context. Furthermore, this practice reflects the deep connection between food and spirituality in many cultures around the world. In Egypt, where history and spiritual traditions are deeply embedded in everyday life, it is not uncommon to encounter dietary prohibitions that challenge our modern understanding of diet. Garlic, seen as a food that can ward off spiritual energy, perfectly exemplifies how traditions shape what is eaten, or, in this case, what is not eaten. Now that we've seen the spiritual impact of garlic in Egypt, let's move on to Switzerland, where the debate over raw foods and pasteurization brings issues of public health and food safety to the forefront. How can these foods be so controversial in such an advanced country? In Switzerland, a country known for its high public health standards, raw foods are a controversial topic. Although Swiss cuisine has a rich tradition of cheeses and cured meats, the consumption of raw foods, especially unpasteurized meat and dairy products, faces significant restrictions. The Swiss government, like much of Europe, takes a strict stance on pasteurization, believing that this process is essential to ensuring food safety. Products such as raw milk and certain types of meat are viewed with suspicion, and there is strong regulation that limits their sale and consumption. This country's curiosity makes us reflect on how a place so advanced in terms of public health can have such a conservative stance towards raw food. Pasteurization is widely considered a preventative measure against foodborne illnesses such as salmonella and listeria, and Switzerland values the health of its citizens above all else. However, for many purists and advocates of natural eating, these restrictions are seen as an interference with food choices and a barrier to the consumption of authentic and traditional products. Furthermore, European legislation on raw food goes beyond simple health concerns. It is also a way of preserving quality and safety standards that are recognized globally. In Switzerland, where trust in healthcare institutions is high, these rules are part of a social pact. Citizens accept strict regulation in exchange for a guarantee of quality and well-being. However, for those who want to experience the most authentic flavors of Swiss cuisine, this restriction can be an unexpected obstacle. And now, leaving Switzerland, we are going to cross the Atlantic to Brazil, where energy drinks face controversy and regulations that raise questions about public health and the impact of these substances on the body. What happens when the government intervenes in consumer choices? Let's find out. In Brazil, energy drinks have become the subject of controversy, especially because of their effects on public health. With the increase in consumption among young people and teenagers, Brazilian authorities began to impose restrictions on the sale and advertising of these drinks, mainly due to the high content of caffeine and other stimulants. In some states, there are regulations that limit the sale of these products to minors, and the discussion about the impact of substances such as taurine and guarana is under constant debate. The Brazilian government seeks to protect public health, especially of the most vulnerable populations, which creates a clash between freedom of consumption and control measures. The country's curiosity here is how Brazil, which is known for its cultural diversity and its energetic parties, positions itself in relation to drinks that promise to increase mood. There is a delicate balance between the desire to protect the population and the demand for products that meet the fast-paced lifestyle of Brazilians, especially in large cities. This controversy leads us to reflect on how public health is a constant concern in a country where legislation can vary significantly from region to region. In addition to restrictions, awareness campaigns about the risks of these drinks also play an important role. Health organizations and the government have warned about the dangers of excessive consumption of energy drinks, especially when combined with alcohol, something very common at parties and social events. For many Brazilians, this mixture represents a real health risk, and the government seeks, through educational campaigns, to minimize the damage without necessarily imposing drastic bans. And after exploring the issue of energy drinks in Brazil, we head to Nigeria, where food import laws are so strict that they shape what comes in and out of the country. Let's understand how these restrictions affect what Nigerians eat and why food self-sufficiency is a national priority. In Nigeria, laws governing food imports are extremely strict and aim to protect the local economy and ensure food self-sufficiency. The Nigerian government imposes very high tariffs and, in many cases, completely bans the import of certain products, forcing the population to consume locally produced food. This policy aims to strengthen domestic agriculture and reduce dependence on foreign products. However, for consumers, this means less diversity and, in some cases, lower quality food, as the country still faces challenges in terms of agricultural infrastructure. This country's curiosity leads us to reflect on the sacrifices made to promote food independence. While many countries seek globalization as a path to an abundance of products, Nigeria goes in the opposite direction, with a protectionist policy that seeks to stimulate domestic production. The idea is that, in the long term, Nigeria will be able to feed its population with its own resources, without having to depend on the international market. This not only preserves the economy, but also creates jobs and boosts rural development. However, this strategy has its challenges. The lack of diversity in food products can be a problem, and Nigerians often do not have access to imported foods that are considered staples in other countries. Additionally, domestic agricultural infrastructure is still developing, which means food prices can be high and quality variable. Still, food self-sufficiency is seen as a goal of national pride, something the government is determined to achieve. Now that we understand Nigeria's strict import laws, let's move on to Russia, where the battle against fast food intensifies. Let's see how the Russian government tries to preserve its traditional food culture and fight against large international chains. In Russia, the government has waged a real war against fast food, especially against the large international chains that have dominated the market in recent years. Although fast food is popular, particularly among young people, the Russian government has made efforts to promote traditional home cooking, which is seen as healthier and more authentic. On several occasions, President Vladimir Putin highlighted the importance of valuing Russian cuisine, encouraging the consumption of locally produced food, and criticizing the negative impact of fast food chains on the population's health. This movement reflects an effort to protect Russian cultural identity in the face of globalization. Interestingly, While Russia does not directly ban fast food, the government runs regular campaigns to promote healthier alternatives and support local agriculture. Recently, there have been attempts to increase taxes on processed foods and impose restrictions on fast food advertising, especially aimed at children. The government also encourages consumers to prefer traditional dishes such as borscht, pelmeni, and blinis, which carry the country's flavor and history. The country's curiosity here reveals an effort of cultural resistance against the advance of fast and standardized food. This tension between fast food and traditional food shows how the Russian government tries to balance modernity with national pride. While Russians, especially in big cities, embrace a faster-paced lifestyle with increasing demands for convenience, the government struggles to preserve culinary roots and protect public health. However, this battle is an uphill one, as fast food chains offer affordable prices and convenience that are hard to beat. Leaving Russia, we travel to Mexico, where dairy regulations reveal how food safety can also shape traditions. Let's understand why certain dairy products are banned in Mexico and how this affects local food culture. In Mexico, food safety is taken seriously, and this is evident in the strict regulations surrounding dairy products. Fresh milk and cheese, especially those made with unpasteurized milk, face bans and severe restrictions in several regions of the country. These products, popular in many parts of the world, are considered a public health risk by Mexican authorities as they seek to prevent outbreaks of diseases such as Salmonella and Listeria. The curious thing here is that despite these restrictions, many Mexicans still produce and consume these products clandestinely, keeping rural traditions that span generations alive. The country's curiosity in this case is how food bans not only protect public health, but also challenge deeply rooted traditions. In many rural areas of Mexico, fresh milk and artisanal cheese are part of the everyday diet, and these practices are passed down from generation to generation. However, in urban centers, health authorities maintain strict surveillance, restricting the sale of these products in markets and supermarkets. The result is an interesting contrast between rural and urban eating practices where modernity and tradition meet. Despite the bans, many Mexicans still prefer fresh dairy products to processed ones, and consumers are looking for ways to get around the rules to purchase their favorite cheeses and milks. This raises the question, to what extent can bans influence a nation's eating habits? In Mexico, this tension between food security and preserving traditions creates a fascinating dynamic where modernity cannot completely erase ancient customs. Now that we've looked at food restrictions in Mexico, let's explore Greece, where marine wildlife protection also affects local cuisine. Let's find out how octopus and squid fishing is controlled and what this means for Greek gastronomy. In Greece, a country surrounded by rich seas, octopus and squid are essential ingredients in traditional cuisine. However, fishing for these sea creatures is strictly controlled by the government, mainly to ensure the sustainability of marine ecosystems. During certain times of the year, fishing for octopus and squid is prohibited or highly regulated as a way to protect populations of these species and prevent overfishing. For many Greek fishermen and chefs, these restrictions are a challenge, as octopus and squid are very popular dishes, especially in seaside tavernas. The country's curiosity here is how the preservation of marine fauna affects gastronomy, and by extension, tourism. The Greek government, by imposing these restrictions, aims not only to protect marine species, but also to ensure that future generations can continue to enjoy the seafood that is part of the Greek culinary identity. This means that at certain times, tourists visiting Greece may not find octopus or squid on the menu, especially on the islands and coastal regions where these delicacies are most consumed. On the other hand, controlled fishing reflects the country's commitment to sustainability. Many Greek fishermen, although impacted by these regulations, recognize the importance of preserving marine resources for future generations. They know that in the short term, the restrictions may be difficult, but in the long term, they will ensure that octopus and squid remain central elements of Greek cuisine, as well as contributing to the health of the seas. Now we travel from Greek waters to the Philippines, where a delicacy called balut raises debate both at home and abroad. Let's explore how a traditional food can generate controversy and be viewed with disgust in other cultures. In the Philippines, balut is a traditional delicacy that stirs passions and controversy in equal measure. This food, made from a fertilized duck egg where the embryo is partially formed, is consumed as a common snack in the country, especially at night. For many Filipinos, balut is seen as a nutrient-rich food with health benefits and is part of local traditions. However, to foreigners, and even some younger generations in the Philippines, balut can be considered repulsive due to its unusual appearance and texture. Interestingly, while balut is a delicacy enjoyed by many, it has also become a symbol of cultural defiance. TV programs and social networks have turned the act of eating balut into a kind of rite of passage for tourists visiting the Philippines, highlighting the cultural shock that this food generates. This country curiosity shows us how cuisine can be a watershed, where what is normal in one culture can be incomprehensible or even unacceptable in another. Furthermore, the debate over balut reflects a tension between tradition and modernity. For many Filipinos, balut is a direct connection to the past, to the way their ancestors lived and ate. However, with globalization and the growth of social media, balut has also become the target of criticism and even jokes in some circles, which raises the question, how can we preserve food traditions in an increasingly interconnected world? Now, leaving the Philippines and heading to Sweden, let's get to know another controversial delicacy, surströmming. This food is famous not only for its flavor, but for its strong and enveloping smell, which causes extreme reactions of both love and aversion. In Sweden, surströmming is a peculiar and quite divisive delicacy. This is fermented herring, famous not only for its salty flavor, but for the extremely strong and pungent odor that emanates as soon as the can is opened. For Swedes, especially in the northern regions, surströmming is a tradition that dates back centuries and is eaten with pride on special occasions. However, the potent smell of this food is so noticeable that, in many places, it is banned in public places, such as airplanes and hotels, to avoid discomfort among those who are not accustomed to the delicacy. The curious thing about surströmming is that it has become a true test of cultural endurance for tourists and visitors. Many see eating surströmming as a challenge, similar to what happens with balut in the Philippines. However, for Swedes who grew up with this tradition, the food carries fond memories and is an integral part of traditional festivals such as Kräftskiva, a Swedish celebration involving seafood. This country's curiosity shows us how what is repulsive for some can be a source of pride and tradition for others. Restrictions on surströmming also reflect an effort to reconcile cultural taste with social norms. In places where the odor can be a nuisance, like airplanes, Swedes understand that the experience of eating surströmming is something that should be shared in moderation. This leads us to an interesting reflection. To what extent can the preservation of a tradition be reconciled with modern sensibilities, especially when the sensorial impact is so strong? Now, leaving the Swedish olfactory scene, we go to Venezuela, where dietary restrictions are not due to cultural or environmental reasons, but due to the harsh reality of an economic crisis that directly affects what people can put on the table. In Venezuela, dietary restrictions are not imposed by traditions or government regulations for the benefit of public health. They are the result of a serious economic crisis that has affected the country for years, drastically changing what people can bring to the table. The scarcity of basic foods such as rice, beans, meat, and even corn flour, essential for preparing the famous arepa, has forced Venezuelans to adapt their diets in unthinkable ways. Price controls and galloping inflation have made many essential items inaccessible to the majority of the population, creating a food crisis that has a direct impact on people's health and well-being. This country's curiosity reveals a cruel facet of the crisis. What was once common in any Venezuelan meal has become a rare luxury. Many Venezuelans have turned to less nutritious alternatives, such as consuming lower-quality cassava or imported rice. The traditional diet, so rich and varied, is being replaced by subsistence food. Furthermore, local markets, which used to be the vibrant heart of communities, now face empty shelves or are dominated by illegal vendors offering products at exorbitant prices. This shortage not only affects the stomach, but also the soul of a country that has always celebrated its culinary diversity. The act of eating, which used to be a source of joy and family unity, has become a daily challenge. For many, survival became the main concern. The current scenario in Venezuela raises questions about how food reflects the economic health of a nation, and what happens when food stops being a right and becomes a privilege. Now, leaving Venezuela, we travel to Mongolia, where food prohibitions have spiritual and cultural roots. Let's explore how respect for animals shapes food choices in this country with nomadic traditions. In Mongolia, the relationship with food goes far beyond nutrition. For the Mongolian people, many foods, especially those derived from animals, are considered sacred. Mongolia, with its vast plains and nomadic tradition, has always depended on its livestock to survive. But this dependence is accompanied by a deep respect for animals. For the Mongols, the sacrifice of an animal for food must be done respectfully and with gratitude, following specific rituals that demonstrate reverence for the life being taken. This respect extends to many aspects of food culture, and certain animals, considered spiritually important, are not consumed under certain circumstances. This country curiosity shows us how food in Mongolia is an extension of spiritual beliefs. The nomadic people live in harmony with nature, and their diet reflects this connection. During religious rituals, for example, it is common for certain meats to be avoided, and milk, a symbol of purity and life, assumes a central role. For Mongolians, food is not just a physical necessity, but an opportunity to honor the spirits that inhabit the world around them. This spiritual vision shapes how Mongolians tend their livestock, and even how they share food with their neighbors. Furthermore, the Mongolian diet is profoundly influenced by the seasons. During harsh winters, families rely on meat and dairy products to stay warm and nourished. However, the consumption of certain sacred foods is reserved for specific times, such as religious ceremonies or important events. This demonstrates the flexibility of a culture that, while depending on nature, knows how to respect its cycles and limitations. Now that we understand how spirituality shapes food in Mongolia, let's move on to Malaysia, where durian, a strong-smelling fruit, provokes extreme reactions and even bans in public places. In Malaysia, durian is a fruit that divides opinions intensely. Known as the king of fruits in Southeast Asia, durian is famous for its peculiar flavor and creamy texture. However, what really makes it stand out is the extremely strong smell it gives off, described by some as similar to rotting onions or garbage. This odor is so powerful that durian has been banned in many public places, such as hotels, public transport, and airports, where its smell can be bothersome to those who are not used to it. Still, for Malaysians, the durian remains a beloved delicacy and cultural symbol. The curious thing about durian is how it transcends the simple act of eating and becomes part of national identity. Many Malaysians have childhood memories associated with this fruit, which is eaten fresh or used in desserts and traditional dishes. For those who grew up with durian, the pungent smell is just part of the charm. However, for tourists and foreign visitors, the odor can be a real sensory shock. This country's curiosity reveals how a fruit, which for some is a source of repulsion, for others is synonymous with tradition and nostalgia. This controversy surrounding durian also raises questions about how cultures react to foods that challenge the senses. In Malaysia, durian is a point of pride, and many families gather during the fruit season to enjoy it together. On the other hand, the government imposes restrictions to ensure that the smell does not become a problem in public places. This demonstrates how a simple food can create a unique dynamic between tradition and modernity, between the love for a delicacy and the need to maintain social comfort. Now that we've explored the cultural impact of durian in Malaysia, let's conclude this journey with a reflection on how dietary diversity reflects global identity. Each country carries with it its prohibitions and traditions, but they all tell us a bigger story about who we are and where we come from. Throughout this journey through different cultures and their food prohibitions, it becomes clear that food is much more than sustenance. It is a living reflection of the history, faith, geography, and social norms that shape each country. What is prohibited in one place may be a sacred delicacy in another. This mosaic of eating rules and traditions shows us that when we talk about food, we are also talking about identity, belonging, and deeply rooted values. Each dietary restriction is, in fact, an open window to understand what that society values and protects. The impact of food bans is not limited to the plate. It extends to politics, commerce, and even social interactions. Countries like Saudi Arabia and India teach us that food can be an act of devotion, while in Venezuela and Nigeria, dietary restrictions reflect broader crises linked to the economy and survival. This diversity of approaches makes us think about how each country deals with its own challenges and how globalization, in a way, questions these traditions. But the most fascinating thing is that, despite the prohibitions, food continues to be a link between cultures. Wherever you go, food carries with it a story waiting to be told. And as we explore these stories, we discover that while dietary rules may separate us, they also bring us closer together because they reveal what we have in common, the desire to preserve what defines us as a people. And so, we end this trip through the curiosities of each country. Now the question remains, to what extent are you willing to explore new traditions and flavors, even those that may seem strange at first glance? The global gastronomic adventure is just beginning.
Hey explorers, if you love discovering the amazing curiosities and stories we share here on Exploring Nations, how about supporting the channel with just $1? This small gesture can make a big difference and is essential to keep this content going. Without your support, our journey might be cut short. And there's more. When you shop on Amazon, use our special link. It costs you nothing extra, plus you get an exclusive discount and it helps us out a lot. The links for donations and Amazon are pinned in the first comment. Don't let this adventure stop, we're counting on you. Subscribe to our channel, leave a like, and drop us a comment.